In a world overflowing with distractions, we seek meaning. How do we transform ambition into something deeper, into true fulfillment? I'm Xanet Pailet, CEO of Course Educa, and I've spent years helping businesses succeed by connecting their goals to something bigger. On the Meaningful podcast, we explore not just how to win in business, but how to grow as individuals. Through conversation with thought leaders, innovators, and everyday heroes, we uncover the stories that drive us towards something greater. Whether you're striving for success, seeking purpose, or just looking for the next steps in your journey, this podcast is your guide to navigating the intersection of ambition, growth, and meaning. So please join me and our incredible guests as we redefine what's possible in both business and life. Enjoy.
The gateway to deep intimacy isn't just in the body, it's in the courage to be fully seen. Welcome to the Meaningful Podcast. I'm your host, Xanet Pailet. Today we're diving into healing from disconnection and shame, rebuilding intimacy after emotional distance, and unlocking the power of pleasure as a path to personal and relational growth. Our guest today is Xanet Pailet, a former healthcare lawyer turned sex and intimacy coach, and best-selling author of Living an Orgasmic Life, Heal Yourself and Awaken Your Pleasure, which I have copied and I recommend it to all of you. After leaving a 26-year sexless marriage and going through her own profound sexual healing journey, Xanet founded Passionate Intimacy Retreats, where she has helped hundreds of couples transform conflicts into connections and disconnections into desire. With more than 15 years of experience and an 80% success rate in saving marriages, she's redefining what it means to experience intimacy with authenticity and compassion. If you enjoyed this discussion, please do the world now with a like, a small review, or even a quick share. Your support helps more people find meaningful content just like this. Let's begin. Xanet Pailet, welcome on the Meaningful Podcast. How are you doing?
Hello, Sam. Thank you so much for having me. I am doing fabulously.
Well, it's good to have you, perhaps. And I think we're going to be up to probably a passionate and interesting conversation for sure. But to kick us off, tell us more about Passionate Intimacy Retreats, please.
So Passionate Intimacy Retreats is the second company that I founded. And I am a sex and intimacy educator and coach. I've been doing this for 15 years. I'm also a recovered healthcare lawyer, which maybe we'll talk about a little bit later. But Passionate Intimacy Retreats is a place where couples generally who are really having challenges in their marriage, maybe they're in a sexless marriage or just having significant intimacy and relationship challenges, come to work with me privately one-on-one in Asheville, North Carolina, over an intensive 4-day period of time. So we go very, very deep into relationship and intimacy issues. And Passionate Intimacy Retreats I work in a very experiential, interactive, somatic-based approach. I also run couples retreats, international group retreats in Costa Rica, and some women's retreats as well.
Beautiful. And we'll always, like always, we'll come back to the very genesis of sort of this story for you. It seemed to me like it was sort of an awakening after sort of your own silence. I think that's the right way to sort of look at it. Like you said, you were also a lawyer in your past life, which will sort of obviously going through that phase also. But tell me more about where did you get sort of a passion, I suppose, to help others in the relationships, and sort of how that came to you, perhaps?
Yeah, well, I think that's really my origin story. Like many people in the healing world, I am a wounded healer as well. So I had sexual challenges my entire life. I got married at a very early age at 24, and basically lived in a sexless marriage for over 26 years. Had 2 children, so it wasn't totally sexless, but as we define sexless, it's definitely sexless. And there were other issues, in the relationship as well, but that was a very significant issue. There was a lot of trauma. And ultimately, I found out after I'd left this marriage at the age of 50, that there was also trauma that I wasn't even aware of in my background, which kind of all made sense. As I left the marriage and started to look at myself and like what's going on with me, and I was young, I was 50, and I wanted to be in another relationship, but I had so many issues with sex. I felt so broken that, I had to do something about it. Like it got to a breaking point, and it was super scary starting to look at that that part of me that felt so broken, and just all of that just felt so unavailable. But I did. I was brave, right? I took the step and started to, initially, I entered the door of Tantra and sacred sexuality. That was my doorway into starting to open up into pleasure and sexuality and understanding sex and intimacy from a different perspective. And one thing led to another. And because I'm a lawyer and I like to learn, I just started taking a whole bunch of different classes and certifications around the psychology of sex, and everything was pretty somatic based. But it just became pretty clear to me, by 52, that I was like, yeah, I'm done with all of this corporate work. At that point, I wasn't actually doing legal work. I was doing development work, fundraising for not-for-profit organizations. I had my own consulting company as well. And it felt like my marriage. It felt empty, right? It felt like, yeah, is this really what I was put on the earth to do? I just think there's something else here. And then it became clear that this was the something else, that, I had to go through this very painful journey, which took a very, very long time, right? But I knew at the very beginning, it's like, this is it. Like, if only there was somebody like me when I was 28 years old and really struggling, who I could have met with, who I could have really helped me understand what was going on, who could have maybe helped my husband and I at the time, reconnect with each other. Maybe my life would have turned out totally differently. Who knows, right? But I really felt like I had the responsibility in the world at some level to be able to bring this healing and this safety to all of the women and men, and couples who are just having such challenges around sex and intimacy.
Very nice. You call it a grueling sexual healing process, in your own words.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of Rumi. Rumi was talking about the fact that sometimes the room is the place where light enters you, meaning that perhaps your tough moments somehow are the one in which can be very defining and very enlightening to your life. You were discussing about this time where it sort of came to you as maybe the missing piece was pleasure, perhaps. Was it, do you remember the first moment when it came to you? Was it sort of a accumulation of everything in your life, or it was more of a decisive sort of, I was there, I sort of just, it spoke to me at that precise moment for you?
I think what happened was I started to feel something inside of me that just felt dead. Right. Like when you're sexually shut down, you feel dead. You don't feel desired. You don't feel horny. You don't feel interest. And I met somebody and I was attracted to that person and they were attracted to me. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh, wow, here's something inside of me. It feels like this tiny, tiny little spark. Tiny, right? Maybe I'm not dead. Maybe I'm not so broken. And that was a profound moment for me. That was the aha. That was the like, okay, there's something here. We need to go down this road because you're not living as a complete person. That's what it felt like. I wasn't a complete whole person.
Yeah, understood. You talk a lot about the fact that pleasure is not a luxury, but a birthright. Tell me more about that. What do you mean by that?
I mean, if you think about, I always like to love this analogy, like if you think about little babies, right? Mm-hmm. And if you've seen little babies, 5 weeks old, 6 weeks old, they're touching themselves all over and they're cooing and they're making all of these lovely noises and sounds, right? Children, as human beings, we are born to experience pleasure. That's what I mean by our birthright. Like, There's no layers of shame. There's nothing that stops us from actually enjoying touching ourselves, being in our bodies. And I think that that's incredibly important. In addition, like think about Maslow's hierarchy, right? Like at the very bottom of that hierarchy is sex, right? Food, shelter, safety, sex, right? Procreation. That is a very, very basic human need. And for me, it's not just about procreation, right? It's about actually being able to experience and explore all of the pleasure that we're entitled to have in our life, both individually and in partnership.
Sure. Let's go a bit deeper in that. So there's obviously a major difference between sex for procreations and, like you said, sex for various other reasons. As the pyramid of Maslow is a great example of that. There's an intrinsic need because that's how we create life, right? You need that
Right.
a male gamete to enter a female one to be able to create life, which is ultimately absolutely necessary for the survival of the species. Now,
Right.
what you seem to be talking about, though, is the pleasure aspect of it, which is obviously something again that can be with the act of procreation, but can be outside of the act of procreations.
Mhm.
How do we, as a sex coach, obviously you're closer to that world than I am by far. How do you navigate that in consultations, and how perhaps do you explain the necessity in your minds of sex for something that is more than just creating life, perhaps?
Yeah. Great question. I think for most couples that come to see me, it's sex is never about procreation. Generally, they've already procreated. They've had their children. And, if you think about sex outside of procreation, it's really about connection.
Mm.
It's about intimacy, right? It's about being the absolute most vulnerable that you can be with another person, right? That's the ultimate. Like you can't be more vulnerable than to really be sexually intimate if you're actually having very connected sex. There's 3 different stages of sex, and most couples don't get to that connection sex. They might be someplace else, like in validation sex. But when you get there, like that's what people want because it fills you. I think it fills all of you up. Both in terms of sensations in your body, but also like your heart expands, right? And that's really what people are looking for. They're looking mostly, yes, it's a release. Let's not say that it's not, right?
Sure.
But it's really about like feeling I am interconnected with this person in a way that I cannot be with any other person in my life.
Mm. What are the three? You said there was 3 levels of sex. Tell me more about that.
3 stages of sex.
3 stages of sex.
3 stages of sex. So the first stage is new relationship energy sex, right? So this is the type of sex when we first meet somebody and we just want to have sex constantly, and there's this huge attraction, and it is driven by hormones. Like this is hormone driven, right? Specifically dopamine driven. And it is actually Mother Nature's way of making sure that there's procreation, right? That is actually what is intended. It's biological. Helen Fisher wrote a great book on this, and I always cite that this is really Mother Nature's way and it's biological need.
Absolutely.
But, right? But it fades, unfortunately. It fades. It's no longer there, usually after 12 to 18 months. And then typically what often happens is couples get into the stage of what we call validation sex. So you have sex in order to have your partner validate or you validate that you like each other, that you love each other, that
Okay.
you're still connected to each other. Often this turns into obligation sex. I need to keep on having sex with my partner in order for me to prove that I love them, right? Or I do this out of obligation. And many, many couples, I would say a vast majority, stay in this stage for probably most of their relationship.
Okay.
And it can be helped with substances, right? So I always know when people are having validation sex when they say to me, yeah, the only way we can really have sex is when we both have had a little bit to drink. And I'm like, okay, right? it means that you can't really be present in an intimate, vulnerable way with each other without numbing some of those feelings so that intimacy maybe doesn't feel so scary to people.
Sure. So there's something
Right.
missing.
There's something missing. And then the third level of sex, which I really help couples get to, is called connection sex. And that tends to be slower. It tends to be longer. It tends to not have, and it shouldn't have, any outcomes or goals associated with it. So you really just want to experience the journey and not worry so much about how you get there, the destination. I think about sex as art rather than science.
Wow. Okay. Very interesting. So let's dive deeper into that. So how do couples perhaps go from the second stage, validation sex, to perhaps connection sex? What are the master keys perhaps to make that jump?
Oh, great question. Okay. So I think some of the master keys, first of all, is making sure that there's a deep emotional connection. That is the underpinning of a great sex life. And very frequently, Sam, when you're in a situation where you're having sexual challenges, underlying those sexual challenges are actually relationship issues where you're not feeling emotionally connected with your partner and you're not feeling emotionally safe with each other.
Right.
So that's the very first thing that has to be changed. You have to be able to help a couple create the emotional safety that they need so they can be vulnerable with each other, so they can start to understand what empathy feels like and how to be empathetic, because again, this is a skill that a lot of people have not been taught, right? And that's the foundation. Once the emotional connection feels more secure, couples can start to communicate more about wants and needs and desires. So in a validation sex relationship, there's not a lot of communication. Sex happens pretty quickly, very routinely, but there's not a lot of communication about like what really feels good and what do you want and what do I want? Like, how do we want to interact as a couple sexually? That's very, very important and often very hard to understand. And that leads to each person starting to understand what their arousal pathway actually is outside of like physically what needs to happen. What do I need to happen? My brain is my biggest organ in sex. Truly it is. How does my brain need to be stimulated for me to create an erotic connection with my partner, right? All of these pieces allow a couple to start to really expand what the definition of sex is. It's such a narrow definition, right? And what we want to say is no, sex can be anything when there is any sense of an erotic connection. You could be talking dirty to your partner, and in my opinion, if I'm getting turned on, I'm kind of having a sexual interaction right there, right? And so really expanding that definition and giving each other a lot of leeway and grace and compassion of like, this is working and this isn't working, and maybe we can try this. And we need to talk more about like, we have a date on our calendar. I make my couples put sex dates on their calendar, or I should say sexy dates on their calendars, right? What do we want it to look like? Can we talk about that? How do we want to feel? That's a whole other piece as well. I can talk about that. Core desires, that's a fascinating topic.
Sure. So for you, in many ways, pleasure is a signal of connection. So perhaps it's something that, so the ultimate goal is connection sex, like you call it, which I think is great. And did you come up, by the way, with those 3 stages? That's yours?
No, I wish I said I could. I don't even know who's come. I don't know that anybody has like come up with it. It just shows up in the literature.
Sure. No, I understand.
It works. Yeah.
So that's fine. So from your perspective, because that's something that I really want to perhaps put some emphasis upon. You really again advocate the concept that pleasure is something not only that is biological, that is something that is natural, but also something that is a signal for deeper connection, which is ultimately what we want perhaps from our relationships, which I think is very, very important point of anchor. Now, you were talking about core desire. I'll circle back on how it is typically taught, as I am a young man, and so I will, that will be a fascinating conversation also. But you mentioned core desires. What's that about? And also perhaps if you can weave in the concept of planning, because I can hear a lot of people in the audience right now saying, well, sex happens naturally. I mean, what are we going to be planning and sitting down and talking about it? We don't do that. So enlighten us with all of that.
Okay, let me talk about the planning piece first.
Please.
So I hear this all the time, like, no, it takes away from it if it's not spontaneous. Here's my response to it. Our lives are really busy. There's a lot of things that we plan. We plan meetings, we plan dinners with friends, right? We plan, if you have kids, you're planning all sorts of events with your kids.
Groceries, appointments,
groceries,
doctor.
right. When you plan something, you're making a statement that this is a priority in my life, right? So planning having a sexy date also makes a statement. This is a priority in our relationship. And especially as young parents, right? That's incredibly important because kids screw up sex lives. They just do. They take up all your time. They come into the bedroom, like at the most inopportune times. You decide you're going to go have sex and they're having a nap, but then they wake up, right? So having some really conscientiousness around it and making it a priority in the relationship is really, really important. And here's the thing. This is true, right? The more, I have this saying in my book, good sex begets good sex. Yeah? Mm-hmm. So the more you have good sex, you have more connection, it feels good, you're enjoying each other, the more you're going to have spontaneous sex. Nothing wrong about having a quickie. And if you've got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, that's your only option sometimes, right? There's nothing wrong about that. But you also have to figure out a night in which we can have a babysitter or the kids can go to grandma and grandpa's or aunties or whoever so that you can also have some real more longer periods of time with each other to be able to dive deeper. But planning is great. And also, here's the thing. I'm going to tell you this. It's a tip as a young man.
Please.
Planning can be really sexy, right? When you're planning something, you can text your partner 4 days in advance. Like, we have this sexy date on Friday. Like, what if you do this? Or what if you maybe don't wear panties tonight, right? Like planning can be foreplay. And foreplay is part of what builds up the erotic connection in connection sex as well, right? So that's my pitch for planning.
Okay, great. Well, look, I'm a heavy planner. I've never been talking about planning basically, sort of these sexy date as you call them in the past, but it's definitely something that is very interesting because you're right. To be very honest, if anyone saw my calendar, they would be in shock. I plan everything, flex buffer, everything. If it's not on my calendar, it's not getting done. Simple as that. So that's something that is quite interesting, and I'll keep that in mind. I want to circle back on that on the core desires and sort of the drivers perhaps of sex and so on. Let's, I suppose, just enlighten us towards that.
Yes. So core desires are actually the emotions that you want to have from sex. It's not the physical activity, but the actual, how do you want to feel? And these core desires, these feelings emanate from our core childhood wounds, right? So let me give you an example because it's easiest to give you an example. So if you're someone like I was, who as a child had to really care for a fairly mother who was very emotionally dependent upon me. And so I felt like, I'm a CEO of my business. I've been running my businesses for years. Like I have to do everything. I have to be in charge. I have to take care of everything. I have to make sure everybody's okay. It's all on my shoulders. But that was a core wound for me as a child. I had to take care of mom. right? I had to make sure she was okay, not physically, but emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
A core desire for me is to be able to surrender during sex, right? To not have to do anything, to let my partner totally take care of me so I don't have to think about anything. Not always easy, but that's an example of a core desire and how it works. And core desires work in one of two ways. Either you're repairing the wound. So in this case, you're repairing the wound, right? Repairing the wound of having to take care of everybody in sex. What really turns me on is not having to do anything and being pretty submissive, right? Or you can also repeat it with agency. So maybe the repetition with agency is like, I actually like to dominate. I like to be in control during sex. That's my turn on. And there's all of these emotions that we feel during sex. When they get activated, when we actually feel them, that's where the turn on comes from. That's actually where the turn on comes from. And when you are able to meet those core desires of your partner, then you want to have more sex because you're actually being met at a very core emotional level, not just at a physical level. It's a fascinating area.
Absolutely. It reminds me of James Clear Atomic Habit, actually, of all things, because he talks about the fact that when something is easy and pleasurable, you want to do more of it. Basically, your body basically just assimilates, your brain just assimilates the fact that, hey, last time we did this was great. Let's have more than that. There's the same thing with winning also. Kobe Bryant was talking about the fact that when he was talking for young men, obviously in this case, and I was saying that when you start to win, you get obsessive over winning. So again, those were just things that came to mind when you said that. A huge issue. And I'm a young man. I had very few loving relationship, but I had a lot of short-term relationship. And there's a big difference between having sex and making love, basically. And there's the major difference, and I want you to educate me on that first and foremost, is the way it is taught, the way we are teaching our children's, our teenager, our young adult, and even of all ages about what it is, not only from a purely action perspective, but also what it means, the taboo around it. Obviously, it is huge in North America, and I really feel, perhaps if I can turn that into a question, that we never been in a more sexualized period of our own civilization, yet we never been in a less intimate civilization than we ever been. So there's a huge, again, gap between those two things, which I think makes our people suffer greatly.
Mm-hmm.
What's the core problem, and what's the plan to make it better?
Well, I have my plan. It's a huge discrepancy. It's exactly what you said. So I think there's a lot of pieces around this, and you see it kind of more and more, especially around lack of education. So we don't teach anybody to have sex. Let's be honest, right?
Zero.
And when we had sex education, we weren't teaching anybody to have sex. We're teaching them about anatomy and hormone changes and puberty, right?
And very little. I had course at school in my lifetime, 2.
Right.
That's it. So
that's it, right? That's more than most people have had, right? Usually you get it in like gym, and they're very well versed in sex ed. Very well versed. So that's that's the number one problem, right? So where do we pick it up? Where do we learn sex? Well, generally parents don't model that for us. That's an issue. Do parents model intimacy, right? Okay. But we pick it up from, more and more, especially for the male population, they pick it up from porn. That's where teenage boys are learning sex, right?
Oh, yeah.
Which is a completely unrealistic depiction of what sex actually is like. But that's what they're learning. And that's why they're coming up with all of this. There's so much choking going on and all of this because they're watching it on porn. And, we pick it up from the movies, which also is also an unrealistic depiction around what sex actually looks like. So that's part of the problem. Like, we're not teaching it, and where we're picking it up from is not at all realistic. It doesn't give people any ability to have empathy, to feel like, not just a woman is not just, or a man for that matter, is not just a sexual object, right? Like, that's a huge, huge problem. And I see that more and more in the younger generation.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, to me, like I said, this concept of being sexualized yet lacking intimacy is really something that is plaguing, to be honest, our society. And I'm hearing a lot of people again that are my age, that are young 20s or even sooner than that. I mean, most people, the average basically losing your virginity in Canada is now 16 years old. It's probably very similar in the United States, I would suppose. So there's, when you're starting to have these relationships, like you said, you learn from it from the internet, and then everybody around you that you're that you care about, that love basically you or you love them. Most of the time there's a taboo. It feels like there's a degree of separation also. You feel awkward, obviously, talking about this with your mom and dad,
Totally.
which I understand, totally understand.
Right.
So to you, when you're thinking about rewriting sort of the sexual blueprints, perhaps let's just put it this way, you do a lot of that with your clients,
Yes.
and obviously healing past traumas, or again eliminating perhaps what is not sex, what is sort of this sort of this very ugly, let's be honest, depiction of what it is with porn and other vehicles that you see on the internet. How do we perhaps heal that, and sort of the limiting scripts also, which I think is something that you touch upon quite a bit, to reclaim intimacy and to understand that intimacy is not only vital for as a core human desire, as you said, from a biological perspective, but from the pleasure perspective, and from I suppose in essential functions and pillars of most people's life. How do we begin to do that, to deconstruct perhaps what isn't perhaps sex, or at least productive sex, and perhaps reshape the narrative on that from a societal perspective?
Oh my God. Honestly wish I had the answer to that. I mean, I think that's part of that's part of my frustration, right? As a sex educator is, yes, I wrote a book. Yes, it sold, I don't know, 10,000 copies or whatever, but it hasn't sold 10 million copies, right? And that's part of the problem, is like, how do we actually get the message out? My personal method of doing it is to try to educate, the population as much as I can through writing. That's what I do. But, I really feel like it's been like a one-on-one thing, like I honestly say it's like, I save marriages one relationship at a time. And I hate that, right? I wish it could be 100,000 at a time. But it's such a deeply personal thing. There is more and more, in the last 10 years, 5 years, there's more and more acceptance of sex coaching and intimacy coaching. There's a lot of intimacy coaches on Instagram, right, and social media and TikTok. So you're starting to see that this is gaining greater exposure. There's more and more people being trained. And I think certainly for the younger generation, they're a lot more comfortable, like getting help a lot earlier, going to workshops, learning, getting new tools before they actually, run into problems in a long-term relationship marriage. There was the Netflix series. Have you seen it, Sex, Love, and Goop? There was a Netflix.
I don't watch TV at all.
Okay, good for you. There's a Netflix series, Sex, Love, and Goop. It was actually a really good series where they work with different couples and show a very experiential, interactive. I knew all the people there, right? And that got a lot of exposure. And so I think we're beginning to see, at a broader public perspective, media perspective, some more realistic ways in which sex is actually being expressed. Also, I'll just say, like, having, requiring that there are intimacy coordinators on every movie set or TV set also has changed the dynamic somewhat, so that sex is looking more realistic.
Okay.
right? Not in porn, mind you, unfortunately, but in general, other in other general media.
Right. Yeah, healthier media from a mass perspective, and that's very important, absolutely important, because we know how big of a deal it is.
It is.
Whoever controls media, fortunately, controls society, and that's a big topic. But the you were talking about your book. That was actually exactly where I was going. So I think that's a great mind think alike, perhaps. But obviously, living an orgasmic life, which is a
Yeah.
very interesting, which is a grandiose title, and I like it quite a bit. So it's obviously it's your bestseller, and to really view I suppose it invites us. I was able to just read a synopsis for now, and really sort of, from my perspective, invite us to view orgasm basically not as outcomes, but I suppose as expression, right? Expression of a full embodied life, which I think is it was very interesting because the way you speak, like you said, is very you're very resourceful in the way you talk. You're very educated in the way you talk. It doesn't feel pushy at all. Basically, the way you explain things, which I really appreciate because there's everybody has his own way to do things, and it's to me it's a little bit like the door of knowledge, right? There's people in which learn differently, and I much prefer basically when it is sort of informational, and I get to become more knowledgeable myself, and therefore change my own environments. That's how I prefer learning, and I really feel like this is somehow how you teach, perhaps intentionally or not. So it's quite interesting. Now, let me ask you sort of the premise of that whole book too, so we can have it on the show. What does it mean to truly live an organic or orgasmic life, perhaps emotionally, spiritually, relationally? What it is to have an organic life, Janet.
So I think it has there's a couple of perspectives. The book talks about my own journey and then also the journeys of some of my clients. The first half of the book is about what blocks us from having pleasure. And the second half of the book is about ways to experience pleasure, like more specific tips and tools.
Okay.
But the concept of living an orgasmic life, I think, has a couple of layers. One layer is that, orgasm is expansion. Right? That's really what happens when we have an orgasm. Our energy expands. So living an orgasmic life is allowing your life to be expansive in all aspects of it, right? The emotional level, the spiritual level, the physical level as well. So I think about that. I think about expansion. I think about it also being pleasure. Like, why not live a pleasure-filled life, right? Like, why not? Like at the end of the day on your deathbed, this was a question that you asked me before. At the end of the day on your deathbed, when you look back, what are you going to think about? Are you going to think about the fact that, you were incredibly productive, that you 10x'd your business, that you're, running a multi-billion-million-dollar corporation? Is that really what makes you happy? Or is it going to be about the experiences that you had of connection of other people that really made you feel seen and loved and understood? And at least I know for me, I know how I answer that question, right? And I think that's part of also living an orgasmic life. And the other part of living an orgasmic life, and I think I probably relate this more to the feminine side of orgasm, is, feminine sexual energy is, if you think about, I don't know what you know about Tantra and sacred sexuality, but, the earth element associated with our sex center, this is both for women and men, is water. And water flows.
Yes.
Right? And so when I think about an orgasmic life, I think about flowing with the feminine energy or just flowing with the energy, right? Again, and allowing you to let life lead you at some level, right? Not saying that you shouldn't be using the left side of your brain. I think that's the right side. I always get mixed up. The left side of your brain to problem solve and figure things out and plan.
Left side. Mm-hmm.
Left side. Got it right. Okay. But to actually allow life to lead you, to not be afraid to follow where the energy is actually going. That's the way I've lived my life, right? Certainly that's the way I've lived my life in the last 15 years of just following the energy. This is where it's taking me, trusting at some level that the universe is going to be there to support me rather than having to constantly feel like I'm powering through. And that's what I used to do. I used to power through my life. Well, I can do this and I can do that and I can do that. And there's still a part of me that does that, right? But more and more, what I really try in living an orgasmic life is to really follow where my energy is taking me in business, in relationships, everything.
Like Bruce Lee said, be like water, my friend. Be like be like water. It's interesting you say this. I was rereading. I'm a very avid reader. The Way of the Superior Man, David Data, and he talks about feminine energy words for words for what you just said. About feminine energy being water and masculine energy being more of a mountain, perhaps. And the concept of having masculine energy being able to let woman energy crash upon it and so on. Very interesting, lovely book, by the way, for anyone that wants to learn more. And same thing for your book, by the way, will be in the descriptions if you guys want to grab a copy, obviously, of it to live an orgasmic life. Who doesn't want such thing, perhaps? So you touch upon this a little bit, but I want to go deeper into the sort of the sexless relationships. Because you talk about the fact that sexless doesn't mean hopeless. There's a major difference between those, and that's what your work is really sort of normalizing the unspoken reality of millions of couples. And that's something that I'm a very young gentleman, so I don't have the same reality. But sometimes when I'm getting perhaps in front of these topics, you sort of think about who in your family, for example, or your friends are in couple. And how is it going for them, perhaps in that pillar of life? And you sort of get to understand that it's a broken system here. There's something missing, certainly, because a lot of people are not perhaps feeling that they are fulfilled from a sexual perspective, which is quite sad in a way. But I want you to tell me one of the very key concepts. I'm a religious man, first and foremost. I'm an Orthodox Christian, so I believe in saving marriage when it's possible. Obviously, there's always exceptions, but the concept of being able to keep a relationship intact, I think it was one of the most beautiful things in the whole world. Now, you talk a lot about basically reawakening desire. Tell me about that process. Tell me about we're completely selfless, and our goal is to have an amazing sex life. What's the process looking like, perhaps, for somebody that wants to get into this journey?
To reawaken desire in the context of a sex in the marriage, in the relationship itself. Okay, yeah. Well, I think it goes back to what we talked about a little bit before, which is understanding where desire went, what's missing, what's happening, right? And again, the vast majority of long-term sexless marriages, there are issues around emotional safety and vulnerability and no communication and miscommunication. So how do you awaken desire? You start to look at your partner as the person who you've went through all of these experiences with. I do this beautiful exercise. Everybody cries. It's wonderful.
Okay.
Where I have couples, I take them through, like, I'll say, well, this is the story of Xanet and Sam, for example. Like, they met, they fell in love. Remember what it was like, looking in each other's eyes for the first time when you realized you fell in love, and then you got married, like just taking them through their history, right? The joys that you've experienced, the Christmases you have experienced, the pain that you experienced, the loss you've had together. But here you are, you're still here together as a couple, getting them to understand, we did this together and here we are, we're still committed to being in this relationship, number one. And then number two, can you take a moment here and imagine what it's like to be in your partner's shoes? Like Xanet, what's it like to be Sam? What's it like to be in his head and his body? What gives him the most passion, the most joy? What's he most scared about? What's his greatest challenges? And reverse it, right? And that's a very powerful experience for each of the individuals to really see whether or how their partner sees them and feels them. And 90% of the time, I would say it really resonates with people. And when it doesn't, we know like, oh, there's a really big problem here. You really don't see your partner. Like you really are not attuned to each other.
Right.
Right. Right. And
You
that's
know, even though that being seen is in many ways, that's what being love is, right? Is
right.
being able to see each other. I recall a quote by Bernie Brown, and which is amazing, obviously. And she talked a lot about the fact that the most intimate thing basically is you can do is allow somebody to truly sees you for who you are, really who you are, not this sort of shielding, not this sort of the first phase where you hide perhaps the negative aspect of your life, or we all have obviously downfalls and negative qualities. So that's really something. Authenticity, I suppose, is very important.
Yeah.
You talk at the very beginning about the safety aspect of relationship, and you I saw one thing that you posted. It's called sort of safety as a new sexy. You like the sexy word? You use the sexy
Vulnerability is sexy.
right? Exactly,
Yes.
exactly. So
Yes.
if you will, from that perspective, why is emotional safety perhaps the missing piece in your understanding of long-term passion, and how can we focus on that and make it flourish?
Yeah. Well, I think that the reason it's the missing piece in long-term passion is because we again, as society, we don't teach people how to repair conflict. So why do you lose emotional safety?
Mm,
You lose emotional safety because you've been in a lot of conflict with your partner, right? They could be little things, they could be big things, but they build up over time, big time, right? And then you start to lose trust and you start to build resentment. And those are the pieces that start to break down emotional safety. Oh, if I actually take a risk and share this with my partner, are they going to use that against me? Are they going to try to manipulate me?
right.
Right. And that's what breaks down the emotional safety piece. So the way around that, which is again where my work is, I think, very different than what I have seen from the hundreds of couples I've worked with who have been to therapists, is that I actually teach people how to repair conflict. Like you need to know that. I think one of the things that couples don't understand is like fighting is normal. It is normal to get in conflict with a person that you love the most because you are going to hit each other's wounds. That's what a trigger is. And that's what happens when we get in conflict. The problem is we don't know how to repair the conflict in a way that actually creates more closeness and more intimacy. So when you can start to create the emotional safety and you know that, yeah, we're going to get in a conflict. My partner and I got in a fight the other night, but we were able to repair it within like 2 hours. That was good for us. Because we have tools and skills to be able to do it where we can just say like, wow, yeah, I could see and when I said it to him, like, I hurt you. I can see you're really hurt and I blamed you and that sucks. I get it. You're hurt. It doesn't take a lot. It's hard to do.
Yeah.
But creating that process, like having a process and even just knowing, oh, we're going to get in a fight, but I know that we're going to be able to repair it. It's not going to tank us and it's not going to build up all of this additional resentment. Once you break through that barrier, which is a really important barrier, then you're able to be like, okay, now I can relax. Now I can take a breath. Now I can really be with my partner and show all of myself to you, all of my vulnerability, right? All of my humanness. And that makes people really sexy. It does. When you see
Absolutely.
that, when you see somebody being vulnerable, because what is vulnerability, right? Like vulnerability for me is, when you're vulnerable with me, I realize like, oh, I'm not as crazy. Like I'm just as screwed up as everybody else. Like you're just as screwed up as me, right? It reduces my anxiety about myself when I can see another person being vulnerable. That's
It,
super important.
it humanizes us. It is by far one of the most important things, 100%. And the it's interesting. You were mentioning the two hemispheres of the brain earlier on, or very left side, basically society, the way it's built, the way perhaps we performs. We're very performance based, basically society. Also, you work with more women than men, right? Would that be correct to say?
No, I work with couples.
So you work with couples. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
And
mostly.
mostly heterosexual couples, all couples.
My couples tend to be heterosexual.
Yeah.
Every once in a while I'll have like a queer couple, but they're mostly high achieving, successful, high career people kind of couples.
Okay, great. So when you're thinking about sort of the female erotic reclamations and the female energy in general,
Mhm.
one thing that makes sense in the Western culture, and every time I go elsewhere, I can very much feel it, is, and I'd love to hear your take on this, and feel free to disagree, but I really feel like in the Western culture, we've been again such a performance-based culture that the feminine energy is becoming more and more masculine.
Absolutely.
It is, we have the by far the women that are most masculinized in the world, in the Western culture, by a large landslide. And there's again, it's more from a societal observations, but I suppose for women specifically, how do you, especially those that's been burned, right? That's been burned and has been perhaps over decades of numbness, like yourself, and or even abandonment, right? Which we see unfortunately way too often.
Yes.
How do women begins perhaps to reframe their relationships to desires after perhaps all these past reigns, and really make it so that it can be more of a, I suppose, a pleasure centered sort of energy.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I have a whole chapter in my book around that. And this is where David Data comes in, by the way. So
Nice. So you know that.
I know David. Yeah, I mean, I've been to his classes. I've read his books. I know his work. So I do think this is, and it's interesting that you said that you see this more in Western culture, and I definitely agree with that, right? And some of this is like and I'm a feminist, but some of this is the feminist movement,
Absolutely.
right? When I was growing up, I was like, you could be everything. That's what my mom said to me. You can be a mom, you can be a lawyer, you can do it all. You don't need a man in your life, basically, even though she
Yeah.
wanted me to get married, right? But so I think we have done a huge disservice to women and to men around and it's fantastic, believe me. Women should be CEOs, we should be entrepreneurs, all of that stuff, right? But we've done two things. We've made it very hard for women to lose control. So many, many women really, really need to be able to lose control and surrender in the bedroom so that the masculine energy can be there. Or the man has to come up with the feminine energy, which is also fine, and the woman has to come up with the masculine energy. But for there to be an erotic charge, there has to be that dichotomy, right? There has to be a positive on the battery and a negative on the battery, or there's no charge. And that's a huge issue. So men have gotten disempowered as well, right? This is a big issue for men. Men are afraid to bring their male sexual energy into the bedroom because they've been shamed for it. They've been sued for it. They've been put in jail for it, right?
100%.
And that's a huge issue. It's a huge issue. Half the time, like I have to look at the men in the room and say, like, okay, she gives you permission.
Yeah.
And I give you permission to bring your male sexual energy to her because that's what she really wants. And you're afraid to do it.
Exactly. And I think it's so, and that's exactly what I see also. I see that we have more and more feminine men and more masculine women. And everybody is a blend of energies, by the way. So there's obviously it will be a huge, not only disservice, but it will be just a plain lie to say that because you're a man, you'll always have masculine energy, and the opposite, that is simply not true. But as we see it as a spectrum, I can definitely see, and even the way the men talk, the way the men lead. I am a huge fan of history, so I read a lot of history books and watch a lot of men and especially great men, the way they operated, and it is fantastic, the dichotomy that we see now with the average modern man and the average modern women, like you said, that has been empowered by this liberal sexualizations, and certainly the concept in which, again, they can be a lawyer, they can be a CEO, which is fantastic. There's nothing wrong with that. Though I would say personally that if it is to the detriment of society, or I suppose their own self, because of the misunderstanding that I don't need a man, or perhaps they sort of they come what I called radicalize in their independence. And we see this very often. I would say at least half of the women between 18 and 25 that I ask if they want children, they tell me no. They tell me they don't want to have a man. They want to have a career, no children's. Most of the time traveling the world, which is something that is completely out of the conversation, but people want to do that these days a lot. And so, yes, I suppose that's really what my observation also. And, from your perspective, because here's sort of the big question. And I'm not Buddhist, but I still really love that doctrine. I think it's very interesting. Buddha was a very great man. And in a world where we prize productivity so much, and that's why, again, we use our left side of the brain so much, and therefore our women are more masculinized and so on. And because of that balance, the masculine perhaps is getting shut down. And like you just explained, how do we reclaim the radical act of slowing down for pleasure, of relinquishing some of those, I suppose, I wouldn't call duties, but some of those perhaps thoughts of, if I'm not productive, if I'm not, like you said, 10xing my business, then I'm a failure. How do we slow down and enjoy?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all need to meditate. Seriously.
Agree.
I think we all need to set aside time to ground ourselves, to meditate, to come into our body. And I do think that embodiment is a key component here, right? Because when we're in our left side of our brain, when in any part of our brain, right, we are up here in our head. This is where our energy is, and we're not feeling things. We're not aware of things. We can't experience pleasure. We're just in thoughts. Breathing, touching, slowing down can the biggest thing that you can do to improve your sex life, the biggest thing that you can do is just slow down, right? I have a series of videos. I'm going to tell you this. It's a gift I'm going to give out to anybody, right? It's called, you go to the website, how to improve mylovelife.com. But essentially it's 7 3-minute videos, because we have short attention spans, on very specific tips. And the first one is to slow down, right? We need to slow down. We need to slow down to see. We need to slow down to smell. We need to slow down to touch. We need to slow down to breathe. There's a lot of powerfulness. There's a lot of, in the space in between, in the silent space, energetically, right? One of the things you asked is, how do you build this erotic energy? There's lots of different sexual styles. The energetic style is one of them, where we really look at what does it feel like when we energetically connect with each other? But there's a lot of power in the in-between, in what feels like nothing. That's where the energy is. And you can't get there unless you slow the heck down. Really slow down. And I think that's the key to a lot of things, but it's definitely the key to experiencing more pleasure in your body, because when you slow down, you feel more sensation.
I think in many ways that stillness is one of the many things that we unfortunately lost, perhaps, with this productivity basically for systems. And alongside other things that I think are very important, like you said, sort of the concept of bouncing forward, and this concept of again utilizing sort of those setbacks perhaps as ways to empower and enlighten yourself. But Nietzsche talked about this quite a bit. Nietzsche is my favorite author by a landslide. And he talks about the concept of the fact that, again, we made sort of suffering meaningless. But so I think that and that's why I wanted to really dive deeper with you on this, about the what is pleasure, and I suppose what you meant perhaps to be able to advocate the right message, because pleasure blindly, and we see this a lot with this sort of the hedonist movement, can be certainly dangerous, but that's actually not at all what you're suggesting. Is way more about we complement the vital need for connections, and with more connections there's more love. With more love, obviously, there's more grace. I think the world will be much better this way. Certainly, that's definitely a way to sort of see it from a societal perspective. One thing that we didn't touch on all, but I want you just to hear it a little bit from you, because it's something that you do business wise, is retreats, right? So retreat is something that you do quite a bit of. Mm-hmm. And you facilitate basically more than 100 couples, basically, intimacy retreats. So you've been around the block a few times. So I suppose from your perspective, what's the magic of a retreat setting, and why is that so transformative? About, I suppose, what transforms is, and what's so transformative about the weekly therapy, what's the difference with weekly therapy that sometimes cannot?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, well, for me at least, and this is just me, weekly therapy was just super frustrating. There was very little accountability. It was very hard to schedule people. You would see couples at the end of the day when they're already exhausted and they're distracted, and coming to a retreat, whether you come to like a group retreat where there's 10 couples, right, or coming to a private retreat, you are laser focused on you and your partner and the relationship. And, we work intensively. I work over a 3-hour period of time with people per day, right? And that's, some people are like, that's not a lot of time. I'm like, it's a lot of time when you're doing deep emotional couple work and you're doing work around intimacy. It's a lot of
Oh yeah,
time,
oh yeah.
right?
Then you sleep for 8 for sure. Afterwards, you take a nap.
Exactly. Exactly. You go deep. You go really deep. And I also can see when blocks are happening, when there's an issue that's going on, when somebody's triggered, right? And then we get to like unwind that, unpack that in real time, which is really, really important. Also, just being in person with me, like I can show you, this is what fire touch looks like. This is what water touch feels like on your body, right? Like I'll touch a client with their permission, of course, and show them that, right? Excuse me. So the opportunity to be able to do a lot of coaching for me is a huge advantage. But also, here's the thing. You said you don't watch TV. I don't have a TV in my house either. And I haven't had one for 15 years. But when they're done with their session, they go to this beautiful, sexy Airbnb that's on our property that has a hot tub and a sex chair and a swing and it's beautiful central art. It's it's very sophisticated and gorgeous.
Nice.
A gourmet kitchen, and a playroom, also very sophisticated. And they get to have time together, to not have a TV to distract them, right? Which a TV is like a huge distraction from intimacy, huge, absolutely huge. So no electronics. I mean, yeah, maybe that they're Wi-Fi or whatever, but I try to tell people like, this is like time for you to be together, whether you're napping or a lot of times, Sam, a lot of the work gets done out of session. I just had a couple here. They've been in a sexless marriage for 15 years, which, by the way, is defined as having sex less than 10 times a year. So you can still be having sex once a month and still be in a sexless marriage as it's been defined.
Sure.
Right. And, after like the second day, and they left me and things were challenging, right? I asked them really hard questions. I saw them individually. That's another opportunity. I can break them up. Right? Maybe there's something they need to tell me that they don't feel comfortable saying in front of their partner. They talked for 11 hours. They worked through a whole bunch of issues and came back the next day in a much better place. I'm not saying they were perfect. By the end of the retreat, they were good. We're still working together.
Sure.
But they had the emotional safety to be able to really talk to each other about some very hard questions in their relationship, right? And a lot of the work and processing and integration gets done outside of my office. And I think that's another really powerful way. When it comes to group retreats, you've been on group retreats, yeah?
Yes.
Right. Like group retreats are amazing, right? Because everybody is a teacher and everybody is also learning, right?
Student.
So,
Yeah.
and that's the amazing experience in group retreats. And it starts to normalize all of the craziness that goes on in relationship. Oh, that's happening with you too. That's happening with us too, right?
Right.
And so group retreats have that energy of a lot of sharing and deshamifying and normalizing the challenges around sex, the challenges around intimacy, as well as, being in the erotic energy of other couples that creates more erotic energy for a couple as well. If I feel this couple, 10 feet away from me, like doing a little juicy exercise, I'm kind of like, yeah, I'm kind of feeling that in my body. Let's play with that a little bit, right?
Yeah,
So
you don't feel alone anymore, right? Because
you don't feel
there's people
alone.
around you. They have the
Right.
same problem. You see that you're human after all,
Right. Exactly.
as they say. And talking about the concept of being human, I really want to sort of tie the bow perhaps with a you touched this. You said in this episode that you see sex as art, and I think it is very interesting that you say that. You also talk about the fact that sexuality is a spiritual path, and you see it as a spiritual path, and you put a lot of emphasis on that actually content wise, and your own journey reveals it, but also what I can see is, and we can not only from a spiritual, also the religious world. I think that there is a big misconception, perhaps from your perspective, and a lot of people that are feeling that sexuality and spirituality they must remain separate. They are separate. They're completely different pillars. And perhaps I think this lack of integration of something so vital, both things that are so vital, I think sometimes creates this expectancy of people feeling ashamed of the desire, feeling ashamed of basically wanting again to have more, and really trying to. And I see this a lot. I really believe, from my perspective, who you truly are is a soul in a body that carries mind. That's what I believe. And Mark Nepal was talking about that quite a bit. He said that spirituality is not about escaping the body, but coming home to it. And that's something that I think it's the same thing with sex, right? If, like you said, if it's just a routine and you're doing it just to say that it's done and you just check on the calendar, guess what? Will be validation sex, right? We just learned that. We just learned that today. So keep up, people, keep up. But from your perspective, what would you say to someone who feel like that sexuality and spirituality must remain separate? And how can we enlighten the world with the fact that perhaps integration within those two could be the answer?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, there's two sides to this, right? Because at some level, I'm going to say that it is because of religion that we have a lot of shame around sexuality, right? So
Sure.
that's been one of the major factors that have affected how we feel around sex and therefore how we experience it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think my pathway into spirituality and sexuality, again, for me, came through the door of Tantra, which is sacred sexuality. And, in Tantra, the word Tantra, which is a Sanskrit word, we talk about to weave. And what are we weaving? We're weaving together our physical body, our emotional body, our energetic body with our partner, and our spiritual self through our seventh chakra with spirit, however you define spirit, right? And so, this is where connection sex comes in too, as well, right? Where there's a way in which, when I'm really in this experience and maybe even having an out of body experience, which, if you think about it, an out of body experience is a spiritual experience. You are no longer in your body. There is another force around.
Yes.
You are connecting to spirit. You are having a spiritual experience. An orgasmic experience can be very, very spiritual for many individuals. My partner sees colors every time he has an orgasm. It's crazy, but he does, right? But it's not, because it's the energy of it that's actually circulating. So, I always try to encourage couples to think about, like, if you want to deepen even more, can you understand, can you connect that there's another presence here that's also trying to support this relationship, another way for you to experience your body, another way for you to experience experience energy. And that was my experience. Like I started having a lot of out-of-body experiences when I started to go through the doorway of Tantra, because we were also doing a lot of breathing.
Yes.
And, it's like doing very intense breath work, right? You're also having a spiritual experience, an out-of-body experience. So it's a huge opportunity to be able to deepen your connection with yourself and with spirit or Christ or whoever it is that your spiritual person is, right? Like I have a non-denominational one, but
Yes.
that there's a huge opportunity for that. And most religions, including obviously I know Christianity, like they want that to happen, right? Like very often I'll have couples I work with a fair number of faith-based couples. I'm based in the South, and
Yeah.
that's pretty common. And very often they'll say some will say to me, some you see all the shame around sex, and some will come and say like, well, we believe that you're allowed to be very sexually and enjoy each other in the context of marriage. And I'm like, well, great.
Absolutely.
Like I love that you have that perspective.
Oh, for sure. For us, there's
That's
a
a
big
good one.
distinction between unmarried and married. That's the
Correct.
main distinction.
That's the main distinction, right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
100%. Well, that's
Exactly.
that's all so lovely, and I think that's sort of as last word on my side that in a disconnected world, choose to be connected, choose meaning, choose perhaps a connection with not only the higher self, but also with yourself and obviously your loved ones, and therefore the world. Xanet Pailet, it was an absolute pleasure to have you on the Meaningful Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me and being this vulnerable and being perhaps this passionate about what you do. It's really, you see it through the screen. It's really beautiful. And I would love if you can leave our audience with some last words of wisdom, please.
Oh, yes. Okay. My last words of wisdom is live in a pleasure first.
Thank you for spending your time with us today on the Meaningful Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review or share it with someone who could benefit from it. And always remember, your story matters. Make it meaningful. We hope to see you next time.